And then we'll also, we'll also look at downloading ELMO data. So how can you actually get, off the map, pull down into a spreadsheet some information, and then look at how that could potentially be kind of linked or connected, or at least looked at side by side with ELD programs data. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of next steps. So I'm going to switch, sorry, I have to switch over to a different file. Okay, so I'm going to take you all through kind of just to orient to what this data file that I shared out last night was composed of. So it has a lot of different pieces to it, which I think can be a little bit difficult to navigate. So I want to make sure that everyone's clear about kind of what's in there. Think through a little bit about kind of, where some of this information is coming from. And then, like I said, kind of later on, we'll get into kind of ways that it could be used. So I wanted to start out with this README tab. So that's the first tab in the workbook that you all received. I just wanted to make sure that everyone sees a couple kind of key things in here. The first is the data use acknowledgement. So this is going to have some information about kind of general data use practices and specifics related to this data set. So, just that these are really specifically for the EXA and the RSA. They're not kind of designed for being shared out more broadly or being used for other purposes. We recommend, just like I'm sure all of you would also recommend, using kind of secure data storage for any data, including these. So keeping stuff on a password protected computer, et cetera. And then for this purpose, these data are specific to this year. So they won't really be super relevant in the future. So once you're done using them, we recommend not necessarily storing them permanently unless there's an explicit purpose for that. And then just noting that there's some data suppression that's been implemented. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But just letting you know that we have other obligations, since these are student level data, at least for the prior year enrollment, to make sure that we're not accidentally creating identifiable data by adding other data sets to this, or by manipulating the data so that you can kind of get different count numbers. So just want to highlight that. The second section in here is this description of contents. It's just basic description. We'll kind of go through each of the tabs today, so we don't need to look at that in detail. I did want to highlight that both in the email I sent out last night and in this section, there's a little link to a Smartsheet form that one of my colleagues drafted, which I think will make it easier for us to kind of collect any really nitty gritty type feedback. So if there's a particular zip code and a particular category, you say, well, this I feel like we have more kids that would fall into this category in that zip code, or anything like that. Feel free to reach out through the form. That'll just make it so it's a little bit easier to track any of that that's coming in. But if you have trouble with that form, or if you have other kind of more general questions, feel free to just email me directly. We can always set up a one-on-one to chat about strategy for using these data, et cetera. And then the last part is the wordiest part of this README tab, and it's just a bunch of different data limitations. I've highlighted a couple of them here. We don't obviously have time to go through in detail what all of these limitations are. Just know that these data are generally, I've kind of pulled together lots and lots of different data sources, and it's been quite an experience learning how to kind of work with all the different programs data that we have access to. But the kind of big take home is just that these data were collected by the programs team for kind of state level reporting purposes. And here we're kind of shifting the purpose of the data to be more regional planning. So just knowing that these data, weren't originally designed for this, so there might be some kind of limitations associated with them. Like I said, I highlighted a couple kind of big ones. These might be a little hard to see. But I just wanted to note that we have data for Preschool Promise, Baby Promise, Relief Nurseries, and then OPK, Head Start, Early Head Start. Unfortunately for OPK and that kind of suite of information, we only have grantee level data. So we're not able to kind of look at more fine-grained geographies, whereas for the Preschool Promise, Baby Promise, and Relief Nurseries, we do have zip code level data that we're able to be shared. Also, just because of the nature of pulling together lots of different types of information, and the fact that, often children will fall under multiple categories, kind of adding across columns in any of these tabs, especially the enrollment count, is likely not going to produce kind of accurate totals. So I would recommend against trying to do that. I'll talk a little bit more about data suppression. That's this next one. But the basic idea is that anytime an education agency is sharing data where there's kind of identifiable child information, which in this case just takes the form of a bunch of different demographic characteristics or kind of child and family characteristics, we need to make sure that those can identify whether an individual child might be participating in one of these programs, or other information like that that could be identifiable. So ODE has recommended that we employ kind of a standard data suppression scheme, which basically just means that if we have counts that are really small, we won't present that count. So that count could be, so in this case, it's anything that's under 10 for those kind of prior year program enrollment, children served numbers. And what that does is it just makes it so that we're not, because there's going to be some level of inaccuracy for the numbers, we're not giving you super small numbers that might not be as accurate because they're small, and then also just creating less opportunity for potential identification of any individual child or family. So those are represented by asterisks in the enrollment tabs, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And then the last two, sorry, I'm going through this in more detail than probably we need to go through today. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of these. For the preschool promise, baby promise, and relief nurseries data, I'm providing information in this next tab that we'll look at that's kind of merged across those three programs. So if a particular site had multiple, or in this case, particular zip code had multiple programs that were being served in that area, then that information was pulled across all three programs. There were some variables, some measures or metrics that weren't available for each of the three, but I still thought they would be relevant to include. So there are going to be some where maybe, and they're called out specifically here, where the numbers might seem lower than you might expect, like for example, percent FPL, and that's because in that particular example, that wasn't available for preschool promise. So just a heads up there. And then the last piece is just that it's inevitable that there are going to be some providers or grantees that aren't represented here. In part, that's due to the kind of timeline for when the ELD gets these data. Usually most of this data wouldn't be really usable until early in the following year. So we kind of put things together that were available in the fall so that you guys would have this for support for the EXA that's due early next month. But I just want to put that caveat in there that there will be some things that we just haven't received the data yet because it's coming in late from a provider or grantee. And so just a heads up there. One of, like I said, several different limitations just to keep in mind as you're kind of poking through these data. Okay, I'm just going to kind of quickly orient everyone to what this data file looks like. So the first tab here with actual data in it is the zip code level cross programs for preschool promise, baby promise, and relief nurseries. So in this case, each row is an individual zip code that we have any of these programs level data for. So to clarify, these zip codes are based on the site level information for any programs that had provided these data. So again, there might be some zip codes that aren't there because either we don't have a program listed there or because the provider or grantee didn't provide the data yet for that particular site. So the way that the columns are organized is there's different kind of child or again, family demographic or just general characteristics. So they're kind of under a few broad categories. We have age, gender, some aspects of child or family need, race, ethnicity, and then language information. So these are relatively basic. These are just, again, characteristics that were available in the kind of end of year reporting for these three programs that we could pull together. And so each cell then represents the count of children in that particular zip code, in that particular category, again, that we have data for from these three programs. This is for the prior year because we collect this information at the end of the year. So this can be used as kind of an estimate for who might be seen, moving forward. But again, it's just kind of an estimate based on prior year information. And then, as I noted, anything that's an asterisk, that just means that there are less than 10 in that cell. That could mean there are none, or it could mean there are 9, or it could mean anywhere in between. So I know that, especially, I just want to acknowledge that for some hub regions, there might be fewer zip codes, and many of those, columns within each of those zip codes might have asterisks in them, which is a big limitation, and I realize that can be frustrating. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that that's a limitation to using these kinds of state level data sources. Hopefully, this kind of information, the kind of way that we've been viewing it is that it's something that could be supplemental or supportive of any kind of locally collected, data or knowledge base that you all have from your communities. So I just wanted to say that up front. The next tab that's in here is information at the county level. So it's exactly the same layout. It's just instead of zip codes, we've rolled everything up to county. One kind of plus of that is that for some areas that might indicate that there are fewer kind of cells that needed to be suppressed. So you might be able to get a little bit of a more complete picture there, although the granularity is not quite as good. Okay, so that's preschool promise, baby promise, and relief nursery data. Again, this is kind of pulled across all 3 of those programs. And then the last, publicly funded program set that we have is OPK, Head Start, and Early Head Start. Like I mentioned, the data that we get for that are from a federal report that the grantees fill out called the PIR. That is the only source that we have currently for looking at kind of which children were served. We have this for grantees that serve OPK in addition to Head Start and Early Head Start. So we don't have like any of the Head Start only or like region 11 and 12 that don't serve OPK as well. So just want to note that I provided the OPK grantee information to anyone for which the counties that they said that they served fell under a particular hub region. So the one kind of big caveat about that is there are some, like, I think this is OCDC, sorry, I'm scrolling fast, that have obviously multiple counties and therefore multiple early learning hubs that they serve. So that's going to be even kind of more difficult to break up. But unfortunately, because they're one grantee, we don't have any kind of more fine-grained information about this kind of level of prior child enrollment. So that's the basic rundown for the OPK data. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to call out here. I think the only other thing I want to just point out is that OPK did not have the PIR reports that this comes from, does not have any information about child gender. So we don't know about that at this level. But otherwise, I think the categories should align relatively well with what was available for the other state-funded programs. Okay, and then the last kind of pool of data that we have here are site-level counts for publicly funded program slots. So in this case, there's no data suppression needed because we're not talking about any actual individual children or demographic characteristics of children served. We're talking about like slots that are available, hypothetically at a particular site. So that means there is a lot more information and it's provided at the site level for each hub. So we have a basic info license, the kind of center type based on the license, some info about their site name and kind of general location. And then on the second half of the tab, there's information about the specific programs that are served at that site. So in this case, it's the same programs that we've looked at in the other tabs. We have OPK. This is the number of OPKs and early Head Start slots, and then OPK and Head Start slots, Baby Promise, Preschool Promise, and Relief Nurseries, and then there's kind of a cross-program site capacity. So this should be the total number of kind of publicly funded spots at a particular site. And because I know that probably having that information rolled up a bit could be useful in addition to kind of having the very specific info, I've also rolled it up to the zip code level here and to the county level in the next tab. I will just point out for this one too, which might be relevant for the EXA. I know there's a section that asks about kind of different provider types. You can filter, this is just a pivot table in Excel if you're familiar with that. You can filter by the provider type here. So if you just wanted to look at like certified families, it could do that. And it would tell us that same information at the same kind of geographical level, but just for those particular providers. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I'm gonna stop sharing and check in to see if we have time for questions. Lizzie first, and then if not, we'll have time for questions at the end. But
I do notice that there were a few questions in chat that may be quick to answer. First, there's a clarifying question for the enrollment information that's available at the zip code. Are the zip codes indicating where the program is located, or is the zip code noting where the children are coming from to be served?
That's a really good question. And I wish that we had more information about where children are coming from. What's represented here is where the specific sites are that are serving these programs. So it's the same as that site tab. It's just the zip code that an individual site might be located at, and then rolled up to the zip code level across all those programs within that zip code. So yeah, I know that the other information probably would be more useful for identifying where kids are coming from, but that's not currently available.
And then there are two questions related to future plans, and if you can speak to that, go ahead. And if you can't, I'm sure that's fine. Maybe we can think about it together. Is there a plan for data elements to align between programs in the future?
That's a great question. That's not something I have eyes on right now, but I think that that's something that, as part of this process, I think we've been learning about how we can, as the ELD transitions into DELC, develop kind of a more robust data system. And part of that more robust data system will be, aligning kind of priorities across the programs, so that the data that we're collecting are collected in a way that's equally useful across each of the publicly funded programs that we serve.
And there is a question that is perhaps even more specific, but related. Is there a plan to collect the detail for OCDC in the future by zip code or a county? Just to comment, it's a lot of work for each of us to have to figure that out locally every time we do a project.
I totally hear that, and I agree that it's frustrating that right now we don't have that information available broken up. We are looking into getting information. So this might be background that everyone's familiar with. It might be stuff that no one's familiar with, but the way that Head Start collects information is through a platform called Child Plus. And we don't currently have kind of direct access to any of the information in that. Like I said, that this information that's been pulled here is collected from a federal report that the grantees will send out to the federal Head Start folks. So we don't have direct access to that data, is what I'm saying. We are currently working to see if we can get more regular kind of extractions of that data, so that we'll have like child level and then therefore site and family, et cetera, level information that could be, more readily accessed. So right now we're really dependent on what the providers are sending us directly, but being able to get that information from Child Plus, I think is in the works.
Let's see, we have 3 minutes in our timeline remaining, and I see there is a hand
Claire,
raised. Yep. Claire?
Yeah, thanks. And this may be like such an obvious question, so I'm going to apologize up front, but I'm having one of those can't see the forest through the trees moments. And can you guys can you speak like briefly to what you've given us this data that we're going to break out and put in a different table and give back to you? Can you remind me why we're doing that?
So I think that's a great, really broad question, and I don't think it's a bad question. I think it's a really good question. So I can kind of speak to my thoughts on that, and then I don't know if Hillary, or I can't see if Carmen's on the call, if anyone else would want to, add to that, but I think it's a really good question. My thinking is that, so the information that we're providing is really just one of kind of many pieces of information that would be needed to really thoroughly fill out something like the EXA, right? So this information, there's going to be some data that could speak to priority populations, and then there's going to be some priority populations that this just can't really speak to. So part of the goal is that this information can kind of supplement more local, either data collection or kind of community building with providers that are in the local area to kind of help get a better picture. So this kind of gets you a little bit of the way there. And then the idea is that some of those other kind of planning, local level planning, community resources could be utilized. And then the other kind of piece that I would say to that is that we know that these data aren't going to be everything you need. And so kind of helping as you're working through the EXA to identify what are the other resources that the state could potentially provide in the future to help, fill in some of those gaps, I think is part of the purpose of the EXA. That being said, I feel like I have maybe less background than some people on this call. So if anyone else from Hubland wants to comment, feel free to do so.
I think that was a great answer, Dylan. I mean, really, we're trying to help provide some of the data for the EXA, but we won't have all of the data at this point. And so it will be about reaching out to those local organizations. Like you said, I don't really need to add anything. Thank you, Dylan.
I did want to just add that I can't remember if we've already said this, but I know that there was an email sent a little while ago about potentially getting extensions for the EXA. So we know that obviously these data in particular are coming at least a few weeks later than we had anticipated. And again, apologies, that's both in terms of me just being kind of new at learning kind of what all the different approval processes are, and that being a little bit slower than I had anticipated. So yeah, if in particular, those other pieces haven't come together yet, especially, feel free to reach out to the hub coordinators to see if getting an extension would make sense for y'all.
That's helpful. And then part two, and Margie put it in the chat too, is what is the ECSA being used for once we all complete this and submit it to you? Is this, and I'm a newer hub director, so I know this used to be called the sector plan. So this will be used to make decisions about where future slots are allocated, or no?
That's a question for maybe one of the coordinators.
I'll chime in. And we all know how new I am. So I will just try my best. So the EXA is feeding into your regional system assessment. So it's really for you to see like a snapshot of what is happening in your region right now to then inform your regional system assessment. And really all of that is all about system change. So you're seeing like, is what we're doing right now working? If it is, fantastic. We're going to continue to do that. Or this isn't really working. So we need to try some new things to see, gosh, if we try this strategy, what happens to our data if we do this for a little while, and let's see how that goes. And if it does work, great, we're going to implement this new system region-wide. If that doesn't, then you get to try something else new. So really it's all this data is going in together to help you figure out is what we're doing working, and do we need to revise the strategies that we're using in our region? Hopefully, does that answer? That makes sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, I guess I'm just curious what the state will be doing with it. Because if it's just for us, and I'm not trying to be a fly in the ointment, I swear, I completely promise. But if it's just for us, I'm just curious why we need to create this or fill out this template that has been created for us and turn it in to folks. Because I think all of us in our hub regions could tell you things aren't working, or there are portions of things that are working, but those things are out of our control.
Yes. And I'm going to wrap this up really quick because I know we're super low on time. And this is an important question, so I don't want to downplay that. But so this time around, we're not asking for slot allocation for preschool promise, but in the future, that's where we're going to be using this this spreadsheet. In the future, that's where we're going to use the spreadsheet. That was a period at the end of the sentence. Michelle, do you have anything else to add to that really quick?
No, I think that you touched upon it. There's not the expectation that there will be expansion this time, but this will keep being a deliverable over time, and it will eventually feed into that. That's my understanding.
All right, I think I'm gonna pick things back up. I appreciate this important conversation. And I want to make sure we have time to get through some of the activities that we wanted to do today in using Elmo and connecting Elmo to the data that Dylan sent out last night to help with your EXA activities. So I'm here picking up from our conversation last time we visited these meetings, where we did an overall walkthrough of Elmo to sort of remind folks or introduce the tool to folks, the Early Learning Map of Oregon, for folks who hadn't had a chance to see it before. And today we're picking things up with a more specific activity grounded in the priority population work that you all have been doing for your regions. So I'm going to share my screen here. And while Elmo is reconnecting, I will share that we do have some handouts that I've put together that are going to walk you through these steps. So don't feel pressured to take notes right now. Those will be sent out after the meeting. Hopefully went along with the recording of that goes out to you all. So you'll have those handouts to help guide you. So for the first activity, we're going to visually inspect Elmo, the geographies in Elmo. And we notice that some of the priority populations that you all have identified are complex. There are multiple characteristics of children and families that are coexisting together. And while Elmo does not have individual level data that can tell you, say, how many folks in your region have this characteristic and this characteristic and this characteristic, we can look at population level information for multiple indicators at the same time in Elmo. So the goal for this first activity is to help folks get an understanding of where priority populations lie in your region. So the first step is to go to the map, and I'm going to emphasize now, you can see all my regular things that I use my internet for, but I am using the sandbox version of the Elmo app. This is a link that's been shared to you. I'm going to make sure it's shared to you again. It is not the publicly available version of Elmo. This has the most recently updated indicators and some adjustments that we're pretty sure are final, but we really want to make sure are working well and smooth and streamlined before we go public. And we feel good about the situation it's in, but if there's anything that you come across that's like, that's really strange, please feel free to email me and I will work to get an answer for you. We're going to go to the map and set ourselves up to look at multiple indicators at once. So for this first activity, we're going to start with county level information. The reason why we're starting with county is there are more indicators available at the county level. And then as we get into smaller geographies, there's fewer and fewer indicators, and most of those indicators at like the small, most granular level, those are things from the census like race, ethnicity, federal poverty level. They're very useful. But I encourage you in your initial exploration to start at the county level to get a larger set of indicators that you can begin to look at, and then work your way smaller. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to start with county, and we're going to toggle on fill layers already toggled, circle layer, and boundaries. So fill layer and circle layer are going to allow you to look at one indicator shaded in, like filled in a different geography. And then the circle layer is going to be a different indicator that sort of hovers on top. So you can see how those two coexist within regions. I selected boundary, and I'm just going to go ahead and put early learning hub regions as the boundary so we can begin to see everyone's region and maybe zoom in on a hub region to show for this example. So a priority population that I saw listed for multiple of your regions is something called socially complex families. And it might be a little different for each of you how you've defined those, but those generally have multiple characteristics in those. So I'm going to pick a couple of indicators that are based in the socially complex families priority population. So for the first layer up here, I'm going to pull information about foster care. So I'm going to slide down to the risk and resiliency factors category. And within that category, I'm going to find, I believe it's down near the bottom, foster care. So we have information at the county level for children under the age of 18 years old in foster care. And this is a rate per 1,000. And then for the circle layer, I'm going to select information about homeless students. So I'm going to go to risk and resiliency factors and find information that we have on homelessness, which in this case is K-12 students who are homeless. Now, we know that the information in Elmo is very likely not going to exactly match what your priority populations are. For example, we have children under 18, we have K-12 students who are homeless. But what we encourage you to do is use these as sort of stand-ins or a way to estimate or approximate what the experiences of families with young children in your region might be. We know it's not exact, but it's to guide your estimation process. So we can see that these two indicators are on the map, and you can hover over the little dot to see a value for the percent of K-12 students. You can hover over a shaded area to see the rate per 1,000 of children in foster care. And if you want, you can hover over the boundary to see what the different regions are. I am confident that you know your regions. I'm less fluent in them. Just to show how within a hub region, there's some interesting variation, I'm just gonna zoom in on Blue River, I believe. Did I get that right? Blue Mountain, not River, Blue Mountain Hub. And this one is interesting because you can see within a hub region, there's variation in how these two indicators coexist in counties. I'll just hover over Umatilla for an example. We've got a higher rate of foster care, children in foster care, 12 per 1,000, which just puts it into the highest quartile for the whole, that's determined by the whole state. So it's compared to the whole state, that's a lot. And within that same county, we've got 2% of K-12 children who are homeless. So there's sort of a high and a low. We can float over now to Morrow, which has a less high rate of children in foster care, and at the same time, a higher rate of children who are homeless. So this initial visual exploration can be like one tool, one set of information that you can use. It can be sort of verified or further contextualized by your own regional knowledge of the place that you serve and support. It can be supported by additional data sources. Maybe you have already gathered information, and that can help further contextualize what's going on here. So that's the end of this first activity where we look at multiple indicators at the county level. And I'm going to transition right into the second activity, which is going a little more granular with the geography and downloading the data and looking at some of the programs data that Dylan had. So seeing how those two sources of information can talk to each other. I'm going to just reset my sandbox for a moment, and start from scratch. So we go to map. And this time I'm going to select zip codes as the level of geography. We know that we have zip code level information in the file that Dylan sent. We have zip code level information in Elmo, and we're going to see how those two can talk to each other. I am going to only select fill layer and boundaries. I'm going to skip the circle layer because I want to dig into one indicator for this. I'm going to put a boundary of our early learning hubs again. And for this example, I'm going to pick an indicator that shows up in your priority populations pretty commonly, not everyone, but pretty commonly, which is children who speak a language other than English. It might be specifically Spanish, or it might be specifically another language, but we're going to pull some Elmo data at the zip code level that relates to that priority population. So we're going to stay in the category of community and family characteristics, and we are going to find the percent of children 5 to 17 whose primary language is not English. So this is a census level indicator, or it's from the census, which means it's available at these smaller geographies. And again, it's not exactly your priority population. It's not exactly the people you serve, but we're hoping that this percent of children 5 to 17 can be used as an approximation or a stand-in for the language experiences of younger children within the region. So when Dylan and I were poking around, we found sort of an interesting set of zip codes. So we're going to zoom in over around Corvallis and Albany in the Lynn Benton Lincoln hub. We noticed that there are a few zip codes that have a higher percentage of children whose primary language is not English. So I'm not sure how big your screen is, but the zip code I'm hovering over is 97322. Over here, we've got 97330. And here we've got 97377. So we sort of saw that and went, that's an interesting area. I wonder what might be going on programs wise there. So the way that I would download the data for this area, this geographic area, would be first going down to the lower left corner and clicking download data on map. Click. For the level of geography, we're interested in zip code level, so we're going to stick with that. We're going to go ahead and filter by the Early Learning Hub region. You can also do it by county and other things. But once you've selected Early Learning Hub, you can take a look at all of the Early Learning Hubs and select the one that you're interested in. So for the case of this example, we'll go Lynn, Benton, Lincoln County. And we're going to download the current selection on the map, which means it's just going to download the census indicator that we're looking at right now. You can download all points for this geography and get all sorts of information that's available at that geography if you want to do some more spreadsheet related exploration. For this example, though, we're just going to select the current selection. I'm going to check to agree to the terms and conditions, and I'm going to download the data on the map. You see that there is the option to download childcare providers. For your EXA work, I suggest that you ignore that button right now because child or provider level data is not updated yet in Elmo. So you'll pull things that are unsatisfyingly old, I bet. That data will be updated early next year and might be relevant for some of your later regional planning activities. But for now, just focus on download data on map. So I click that. A file will come up. You'll see that this is the 15th file. I've been doing a lot of this recently. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen just to show you what that looks like once you receive it. Here we go. I hope you see that. Okay, do you see a spreadsheet? Do we see nods? Yay, perfect. So when you get it, it's going to look like this. Community ID is the zip codes that you've downloaded. You see the measure is the percent of children whose primary language is not English. And for each zip code, you get a percent and a number estimate. Additionally, you can see which county it lies in. And if it happens to overlap counties, it's going to show up twice. But what that allows you to do is if you filter it by Benton, it'll show up there. If you filter it by Lynn, it'll show up there too. So it gives you the most comprehensive view of that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass it over to Dylan. And Dylan's going to walk us through how you can use this data download and look at the program's data too.
Real quick, Hillary, I wanted to do a time check. How much time do we have before the next?
She's supposed to be on at 2.
Okay, so we'll do this quickly so we have a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So I'm just going to pull up, hopefully, and share the right screen. There we go. Yeah, so this is, whoops, I already zoomed out. This is generally the view that Lizzie had up on our screen. So again, we're kind of looking at this subset of zip codes here. So what I did is I just kind of pulled out some of the zip codes that Lizzie mentioned here. We can see this is the data that she was describing. So we have these two, maybe, I'm just guessing. And again, obviously, those of you who are familiar with Lynn, Benton, Lincoln region will know more than I will, but I imagine that these two kind of more populated zip codes around Albany and Corvallis, they are, let's see, so that's 97321 and 97333. We can see that there's, you know, about 10-ish% if we're averaging across those two that appear to be 10% of children, rather 5 to 17, whose primary language isn't English. And then when we look at those other counties, as Lizzie already mentioned, the values are much higher. So what I did is I looked to see in the data that we have for that region, we have program level information for 2 of those zip codes. So those 2 are the more populous areas. But it could be that there are, you know, publicly funded programs in these other 3 that Lizzie mentioned. They might not be reflected there, like I said before, because there's either provider data that just hasn't been provided yet, or it could be that there aren't publicly funded, at least preschool promise, baby promise, and relief nurseries in those particular regions. But what we can do is we can kind of look to see, okay, based on children served last year in those particular zip codes and those particular programs, what does kind of that same percentage look like? I'm not going to actually do the calculation, but we can see, you know, based on combining English and non-English language categories here, the non-English groups for both those are somewhere around probably 25-ish%, something like 20-25%, which is a little bit higher than we see for the kind of population level estimates that we can gain or, you know, glean from Elmo. So what that might suggest is that there are, you know, folks who are in these surrounding areas, these areas kind of outside the bigger population areas, who might be non-English speakers, but are traveling perhaps to the Corvallis or Albany area to receive services, or maybe that's where those publicly funded services are available, and so they need to travel those areas. So this could be just, you know, one indication, and again, you know, locally, you know, sourced knowledge and data would be the next step to kind of checking this out, but it might be that these two, or rather 3 zip codes could be areas where looking into whether additional publicly funded slots allocation to those areas could be, you know, helpful. So this is just like a very, very simple example of how the kind of population level information from Elmo could be paired with this kind of programs level information about children served. Like I noted, I just wanted to point out one caveat, and that's that this is preschool promise data that I've, baby promise and relief nursery data that I've pulled up here. Like I mentioned, we also have at least grantee level information for OPK. Again, it's a little bit harder to know kind of which parts of these regions are represented by these OPK grantees, but I just, you know, want to know that information is located there as well. And then the third kind of piece of information that could be relevant is the programs data I'm showing you is enrollment last year. We also have these current year slots. So this doesn't tell us much about the population because this is just potential capacity. But it does show us that there are some additional slots in, let's see, we're looking at these two, are the two that we didn't have programs information from. So it could be that these are new sites this year, or again, it could be that we just didn't have the enrollment data from last year on them, but it does inform that there are at least some publicly funded preschool promise sites in these 2 regions. So again, it's just kind of a starting place to start thinking about potential uses for these data. But I wanted to just share that as an example. I also, Lizzie, you might have already said this, but I wanted to just reiterate that in terms of that data download example and the prior example, Lizzie has thoughtfully put together some handouts that will be shared with you all after this meeting that goes kind of step by step through how to pull those data from Elmo. Just want to make sure I pointed that out. I think that's it, unless Lizzie, you had any other thoughts on that. Otherwise, I will skip us forward to the last slide here.
Yeah, I think we're ready for that last slide.
Okay, so there's a lot of info here, but this was just thinking about kind of next steps. So as I mentioned, as I mentioned, if you have any like really specific kind of nitty gritty, like why is this particular area not included? Why is this zip code not there? Why is this number listed for the number of kids enrolled last year in this particular demographic group? Those kinds of questions, it's helpful just because there'll be kind of, I imagine, a few different types of those requests coming in to do it through this Smartsheet form. You can always send me an email. That's totally fine too. This will just make it so that we can kind of keep everything lined up a little bit better. But otherwise, if you want to schedule a one-on-one to talk more about kind of big picture, how to use these data or other data strategy, or, you know, ways to integrate Elmo, et cetera, with these data, feel free to just shoot me an email. Then for the FCCO data, so Carmen sent out a link to that really cool dashboard that TRI has developed for us last night. It's really cool, but it is a little bit complicated. And so there are going to be 2 sessions where we have a TRI representative kind of walk you through the dashboard. And then from there, if you have questions, you can email me, and I'm just going to kind of work to help coordinate with TRI to make sure that, any questions are answered about how to use that or kind of other things about that dashboard. And then I'll let Lizzie speak to any of the PSU sources as well.
And maybe Beth, you can hop in. There are some new reports available. And we talked about these at the last time we came in. Beth, if you can.
Yes,
Oh.
I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay.
Folks have copies of those. They've all been sent out. I think, yeah, the provider survey report is going to be coming out sometime this month, probably in another few weeks. But that's mostly focusing on childcare providers as opposed to families. So yeah, that's all I have to add. Thank you. You did a great job, Lizzie and Dylan.
Thank you.
Well, I think that we might maybe reserve 1 minute or so for additional questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. So yeah, like I mentioned, feel free to reach out to me directly with questions or check out that Smartsheet form if there's kind of nitty-gritty specific questions that you want to have answered or checked out. But other than that, I just wanted to reiterate that, we appreciate you all being patient with the timeline for the data coming out and with, the limitations that we know kind of these state level data have. But feel free to reach out with me with questions or concerns. I think we have time for Margie's question probably. Yeah, great. Margie, what were you thinking about?
So it's a question I think it will pertain to everyone. I was trying to figure out how I will use the different tools that we've been given to get to the percent of children served by publicly funded services. And so the data that comes from the ACS that's on Elmo is for children 0 to 6, whereas we're zeroing in on children 0 to 2 or from 3 to 5. So is it a reasonable proxy to just take that 0 to 6 population and divide the number by 6 or 5 to say this is the number of children who would be in each age group? It's just a guesstimate.
Yeah, I have done that as an estimate using the census data before. That is similar to how I would approach that. Say if we have from Elmo, you can download it and receive the number of children 0 to 5.
Actually, 0 to 6.
It depends on which indicator. If you're
So
looking
what
at,
I'm doing is the children under 200% of the federal poverty.
there we go. That's where the 0 to 6 comes in.
Yes.
If you wanted to estimate how many children are within each of those ages, divide it by 6 and find how many children in your region you think are 0 to 1, and then double it for 0 to 2. That is absolutely, I have done that for estimating populations like that. Absolutely reasonable and justified is what I would say to that.
And again, that's taking the ranges, adding them together, divide by 2 to get the midpoint.
I think there are multiple ways. Let's see if we have time, I can.
Or if you just want to include that in any TA that you send out to us generally.
Yeah,
that would be super helpful.
I'll add my process for estimating age is in what I send out with the handouts for these activities and things. I think that's a useful little tool.
Right, because one of the questions we have to answer is the percent of eligible children served. And there's nothing that gives us that directly from the data I've been able to see so far.
Right. All right, so I will go ahead and put that in. And I know that we are past time a little bit. Hillary, I'll let you pick that up.
Great, thanks. If you want to include Margie's question in the TA, that would be great to send out to everyone so everyone has that information. I'm going to hand things over to Erin Watson so she can talk a little bit more about the RSA and system change.
Hey
Welcome.
everyone. Oop, can you hear me? Okay. Hi. I'm sorry that I couldn't join for that first part. I was doing another presentation, but I'm sure I'll get some updates. So I am talking about a couple things related to my, of course, favorite topic of systems change. And here's what I was hoping to talk about based on some of the questions that have come up in coaching. One is, how does this regional system assessment like fit with everything else? So I just want to show you a visual of how we can kind of start thinking about that, because I think it can help us communicate it, as well as just make sure we're all kind of thinking about this as deeply as we can. And then I want to talk a little bit about building buy-in around systems change, as including communication. Another issue that has emerged through coaching conversations is the challenge with helping hub partners understand the system assessment and the system strategic plan as more than just funding for programs, but really trying to summarize collective efforts to create systems change. And it's different for some people. It like goes outside the box. And so just thinking about what are some ways to build buy-in and understanding of what that is, get people excited for it, and make sure that that's not something that's going to kind of get in the way. And then also Hillary and Michelle and I were talking about peer-to-peer learning opportunities, because that's something else that's come up a lot in coaching. Is like, man, how do we learn more from each other? The coaches right now are kind of in the peer-to-peer loop. Oh, this hub did something that might work for you. Let me share it and bring it up on the screen. I know I do that in my coaching calls all the time. How can we make sure that you guys are doing that in real time? Because I know there's good stuff happening that doesn't always come up in coaching. So just wanted to have a brief conversation about that too. 25 minutes for all that. We'll see how far we get. Hillary, do you have those poll questions created? Okay, sweet. Okay, I'll let you know when. Perfect. So don't do that yet. We'll do that at the end. All right. Let me show you this. Carmen, are you on the call? No. Okay. Just going to show this on my screen. Because this hopefully can start a conversation. And you guys know me, like, let's make this more of a conversation than me just talking at you. Gosh, there's a lot of clicks to make. Here we go. So topic one, how the heck does this regional system assessment fit with everything else? Here is how Carmen and I were initially thinking about this. And I'd love kind of people's take on this, and if there's any other ways that you see this fitting in. So the regional system assessment has a couple buckets. So one of the buckets is looking at slot enrollment numbers, family needs and preferences, very similar to the ECE sector plans that you've done in the past. And like in the past, that information helps to inform expansion plans, helps to inform local coordinated enrollment plans, to really figure out where, what's the state of how slots are currently being allocated. Do they need to shift? What do we need to think of this? Where do they need to be expanded, and in what ways? However, this year, the assessment, again, builds on what you've done in the past and really digs into a couple additional areas. One of which is, okay, it's not just what our families' needs and preferences, but what are families' perceptions of how those needs and preferences are actually being met? What are the gaps? And all the different ecosystem conditions that you all are asking about that are affecting ECE access, mindsets, policies, connections, human resources, all these different things. And that stuff impacts several different areas and links to several different areas. In terms of like regional hubs, local, it directly informs your local strategic plan, system strategic plan, which again is summarizing collective cross-sector efforts that are trying to create systems change around areas that are affecting everyone's work, right? Not just funding of programs, but really trying to like address those underlying issues that at the end of the day are getting in the way of program slots, even reaching and benefiting families. It also can inform other types of local problem solving that individual organizations might do. For example, perhaps there's issues that come up within a particular school district that may not be prioritized for the strategic plan, but my goodness, could definitely be addressed by those individual entities. So some issues coming up in the regional system assessment can kind of be like almost given as gifts in a partnership kind of a way. Hey, you know, here's something that's come up. Have you experienced this issue? How can the hub support you in problem solving this? How can we be a partner with you? I see that happening a lot in communities where this information is really important to just like bubble up some issues that aren't going away unless we deal with them. So individual problem solving can also be happening. Across all 16 hubs, the regional system assessment results will also, as far as we're hoping, we're trying to ensure that it's going to influence the Raise Up Oregon version 2.0. Carmen is working very hard to try to make good alignment and coordination between our efforts and the Raise Up Oregon and Oregon group. So that is our intention, is to try to make sure that that is being responsive to what we're seeing across all 16 hubs. And also the ELD strategic plan, that there are issues at local levels within the ELD and at other levels that are coming up that the ELD strategic plan could also take into account. And so this is how we started piecing this together, just to see how this fits and how it's informing different things within kind of the arena that we're looking at. Any initial thoughts or feedback on what you see there? Does that align with how you're seeing it as well? Do you see other ways that this is linking to the work?
This is Dorothy. I guess what I could share about my experience is I think everything you said makes sense. And like, I see the through lines 100%. And I keep like, I don't know, like I keep feeling like I'm missing like a step. Like I'm doing the RSA work and I'm having these really great conversations about ecosystem conditions. And I'm like, I've looked at the, I don't know why everything still feels disjointed to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know if I'm explaining this the right way. Like, I've been using the toolkit that you put together, to help kind of guide the RSA conversations. And I think somewhere along the way, I must have missed some step in around the what are they calling it? The ECSA, the early childhood system analysis piece, but it feels like I've already probably done that in some way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm articulating this right, but it feels like I really like most of the stuff that I'm doing with the regional system assessment. And it's like building good partners and having great conversations about ecosystem conditions. And yet the early childhood system analysis piece, like Heidi is my coach and she brought it up and I was like, yeah, I think I'm fine. I can fill out that information. I've probably had that conversation before, but like not integrated in the way that I've been having the art. I don't know if I'm articulating that right.
No, that's okay. So part of what you're seeing, Dorothy, is like our attempt to do a twofer where Ann Morrison, I don't even know if she's still here. I know Ann Morrison is, okay. So Ann Morrison and I worked together to try to streamline that deliverable that she needed with the RSA. So it was like one less step for you guys, because there was overlap. The early childhood system analysis, service analysis, there's like some additional areas, right? In terms of other programming areas that goes beyond like objective 2, but we put them together to try to streamline things. And so you're right, like there's not, that's not mentioned in the toolkit because it's kind of added up a little bit. But let me follow up with Heidi, and I can even follow up directly with you, Dorothy, just to make sure that all of that is making sense and that it's all fitting together. And that goes for anyone else who may be in that boat. Just reach out to me. I'd be
Yeah,
happy to.
I think
talk.
Elaine, we would like that clarification too, because
Sure.
it feels similarly like I'm having a hard time seeing how this is a linear progression of work that will all roll up together and not multiple similar separate assessments.
Yeah. So I mean, really quickly, like if we just think about, this is all going to the strategic plan, right? So if we understand what are the gaps in who is currently enrolled in childcare, early care and education, as well as other types of important early childhood programming like home visiting or whatever else is essential in your area. If we understand those gaps and particularly the inequities that we're seeing, like are there certain priority populations that are enrolled at disproportionate levels compared to everyone else? Like when you start seeing those gaps, that helps you ask new questions about why is that happening and link it to some of those ecosystem conditions you've been talking about to have like a bigger understanding of why are we seeing these disparities in who is enrolled, who's being reached, and are there ways that we can start to address this kind of holistically? Same things with needs and preferences. Again, like this is what you've done in your prior ECE sector plans, right? It's taking that information and using those ecosystem conversations to try to understand what's helping and hindering that. Why are we seeing disparities and inequities? And then when you move to strategies in the strategic plan, when you strategize, you kind of like design strategies for the whole. You take into account what are the disparities and why they're happening, and you design strategies to address both of those things. So in my mind, like they are related because you need to understand what's the landscape to then put in context all these ecosystem conditions we're learning about, how they're reinforcing current inequities we're seeing. That's my initial take. And we kind of have a choice in our time today. We could continue talking about that if people are interested. We could set up a separate time, like I could do it office hours if anyone's interested in continuing to talk about that, and or kind of work through our coaches to have that. What are people's thoughts? Because we can also talk about messaging and buy-in for systems change and the peer-to-peer talk.
Is it possible to have another meeting and talk more about how the puzzle pieces fit together? Because I think it's still kind of a little cloudy to me too. I'm relating to what other people are asking. And so I just wonder if there's another space and time to talk about it.
And I would say the answer should be yes, right? It kind of depends on what works best for you guys. Can we just do like, let me see if I can see everyone in the view. Can people, see if that works? Yes, okay, awesome. Can people put up like a thumbs up emoji thing if you'd be interested, if you would take advantage of like an office hour, if I would put it at an appropriate time for Pacific time, have like a couple that people could come and have a continued conversation about that. And I can see if Carmen can join too. Okay, sweet. There's enough thumbs up to make that happen. Okay, let me work with Hillary and Michelle to figure out like what times would be reasonable given everything else that is kind of on the calendar. And I'll put a couple out and make that happen. Okay, thanks for bringing that up. Let's make sure that you get that clarity. And also, like, would it help to have additional visuals or something else to like written out to draw on? I'm seeing Jillian nod. A lot of people are on camera, so I'm looking at the people who are. Like what would help you? What could we create before that, like office hour time that we could all look at and you guys could use afterwards to help communicate that?
I was going to type this, but I think I just need to say it out loud before I forget my thought, which is like, I think maybe the disjointed feeling that I have is that I'm in one place with some of the conversations with the RSA, like we've gotten into the ecosystem conditions, but now we have this new set of potential data and Elmo. And so how do I like I'm on this path now with my, like, I'm getting ready to plan additional methods of outreach and questions to ask, etc. So now I like, do I pull everyone back and look at this new data? I think I'm just like trying to figure out how do I keep moving the work forward.
Yep.
I don't, if what I just said makes sense. Like, it feels like the data part needed to come before the ecosystem conversation, even though I know it's not totally linear. I think I'm just stuck now. Like, what do I do with the best use of the time that I have? I cannot add another meeting to everyone's calendar.
Yep. So really quick, and then we'll continue this in an office hour, if we even want to call it that, in another meeting. I find these assessments, just like you said, Dorothy, to build on each other. And they have to respond to when we get the data. It's not perfect, right? I mean, ideally, it would be great if you had this data in the beginning. You didn't. You have it now. So there are certain questions and ecosystem conditions you've started exploring that are like pulling together a portion of the puzzle. You have like certain pieces that you've kind of put out there. Now that you have the data and you can look at it, and I would recommend behind the scenes, the hub staff look at the data, use that template on the last tab of the workbook, and start to identify where are the inequities, where are the disparities in reach, in particular enrollment, and bring that to your group and say, hey, here's what we found. Here's the like biggest gaps, the biggest inequities we're seeing. Why is that happening? You know, like, how can we use our ecosystem conversations to better understand what's reinforcing those inequities? And what have we already learned that's helping us understand that? So for me, it's like, it's just new information that can allow you to have a better idea of what's going on and can lead to better questions that help you just like put it all together. Does that make sense? I don't know if I just like said what I said 10 minutes ago in a different way, but
yeah, I think it makes sense for me. Yeah.
It sucks, you know, like, let me just, I empathize with you that it's not a perfect process, but the problem is it never is a perfect process. You know, like, welcome to the real world. It's never perfect. But I think it doesn't have to be to make this worthwhile. And it's just an continual unfolding of information that can help to increase your understanding, lead to better questions. And it just like, you continue this, you know, what I've said in some of my coaching calls is, while there's a deliverable in April for the RSA, you will continue learning about ecosystem conditions for the rest of forever. You know, like, this is an ongoing thing, that these same questions about mindsets, about decision-making, about policies and connections, like, these are the things to talk about. And so, you know, you can continually learn. It's not like learning ends in April. You continually learn and you get as far as you can in April. And then you just continue on the journey. So, you know, like, I also don't want it to feel so constrained around the deliverable, which is important, of course, but it's not the goal. The goal is that you have good work to inform decision-making around systems change. Okay.
And Aaron, in the box, I think it's another, point is the capacity. We've been the little engines that could since 2014. And it hasn't changed. It's gotten more and more and more, and we are trying to be the little engines that could. And it's a capacity issue. So it's not, your work is wonderful, but it's trying to get the capacity to do the work and also understand how the pieces fit together.
Yep. Well, like Molly just said, or someone, yeah, it was Molly. Do you remember in the very beginning when we started talking about this, and I said there's like different intensity levels you can choose for this regional system assessment, given your bandwidth, given everything else. Guys, like, we just came off of COVID, y'all. I mean, like, in general, bandwidth has been stretched for a long time. And I see this regional system assessment as a pilot. Like, we're learning how to do this in a different way, right? And we're going to get as much information as we can. but I also don't want people to be so stressed out by this that you're like paralyzed. You know, so pick the right intensity level for you, given everything else, and just like go with it. You know, any information you get is useful for informing your strategic plan. And so Jillian, like you guys have been busting your tails, and now you're down to staff, right? Because Danielle just had her baby. And so just like be smart and strategic about how you do this, knowing that that deliverable date is not the end of learning, that you will continue this moving forward. Let's just have a like reasonable scope between now and April for what you want to learn. What's the most important areas for you to look into? Focus on those, you know, and then there's others that you can explore moving forward. That would be I'm trying to look at the chat while I'm saying that, to see if there's anything else. Okay. Baseline to measure inequities against, yes. Oof. So go
Hey,
ahead.
Erin, along with the comments that are in chat, I think part of what we all have to balance on a very on a daily basis, right, is when we're using data and information, like we all strive to be data informed, and also really taking into consideration all of the conditions. And there's some hesitancy when, if the data is not perfect, like we all know, there is no data that's perfect. And some of the risk that we all carry if we're touting inaccurate data, and how do we reconcile that with our community partners in a way that is going to lift the system up and not tear it down. I think, you know, we've all experienced in different ways some challenges between, you know, different partners and different this, that, and the other, and we're all sort of trying to work with that. And so I just have to call that out, that data is wonderful, and there is a risk factor if it's not right or accurate, or there's incomplete information. And so I know we don't want to just like barrel down something if we're not taking all that into context.
Totally. No, I think that's great, Lisa. And my observation, hearing similar thoughts from different hubs, is that that's an ecosystem condition, guys. You know, like the fact that the data isn't always accurate, consistent, even disaggregated in the right ways, like that's an issue. That has different, you know, like we can kind of pinpoint where is that happening? Why is it happening? Let's figure out what are our options moving forward. In the time being, given, you know, data is most likely not perfect, let's just be transparent about that, you know, and use what we have, especially in terms of the enrollment numbers and slots. I think that's where that probably comes into bear most. Is that right, Lisa? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Let's be transparent about it. And, you know, like good critical thinkers, let's identify where we do feel more confident and just, you know, like recognize that and lead all of that tension into action, where let's understand why this is happening and what can we do in partnership with the ELD, in partnership with local partners, to try to make sure that there is a better baseline for inequities moving forward, that there is more consistency. For me, it's an action item. And being transparent hopefully can address some of that PR kind of communication wise. You're in a tough spot though, because people are going to look to you and hold you accountable for it. But that's also something maybe you guys can learn together around how are you navigating that tension. Okay, here's my thought, given we have 3 minutes left. Let's do the peer-to-peer poll, because that's a nice link, and know that maybe I'll jump on to the next meeting you guys have and talk about how to communicate and build buy-in around systems change, because that's another area. So here's what Michelle just threw into the chat. I've been hearing a lot from hubs like, how can we learn more about what others are doing? And we wanted to know what kinds of peer-to-peer learning opportunities would you be most interested in taking advantage of? Like, what are you actually gonna use? Because we don't want to develop something that you're not going to use. And how, what is needed given what you already are doing behind the scenes that I might not be aware of. And so I just threw together a couple different options. If you click on that link, it'll give you a little survey. And do you just click on it to, yeah, okay. So you just click on it if you want to like say yes, and it's multiple, okay, ranked order 2, that's fine. Read those and let us know what you're most interested in. So like we could do peer-to-peer discussions in meetings like this, or in other meetings like the equity meeting that is kind of not as frequent. We could repurpose meetings that aren't being used to do peer-to-peer learning. And I could facilitate in the beginning at least around topics, around things that I'm seeing come up so that there's like real intentional sharing. We could also do those kinds of conversations outside of ELD kind of scheduled things. It could be hub only. I could also start facilitating those. And we could be in contact with like Hillary and Michelle and make sure that they're on the same page with some of the big insights that are coming out. But if people want to keep it more like confidential, we could do it that way as well. There could be like platforms like ClickUp, Conflict, like there's lots of knowledge sharing collaborative platforms out there that you can share materials, you can like respond to questions, etc. Like would people dig that? Should we create something like that that you can use from now until forever? And or are there topical discussions you'd be interested in having peer-to-peer learning with people outside of Oregon? Like we've got, I and Hillary and Michelle and others have a pretty extensive network across the country with both early childhood collaboratives and other relevant groups that are working on some of the same issues you guys are. And there may be interesting ways to bring in some peer-to-peer learning even outside of Oregon. Let us know which of those, and the ranking is okay, but I'm almost more interested in would people be interested or not in these things. So rank them for now, and I guess we'll just see what goes to the bottom, and I'll assume that would be the least likely. Is there
Right
anyone
now,
ahead.
repurposing existing meetings is in the lead by far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any on that list that people would say like absolutely not?
People are not wowed by the external collaboration.
Okay, we'll ditch that for now. Would anyone, we should have maybe just done this. Would anyone not like the knowledge sharing platform where you can go on and like share materials, have a record of responses? Renee, you have your hand up. Is that meaning you would not like it, or do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about that. I think it would be really great to have, and I've been saying this for years, to have a repository of information instead of each hub director asking whoever their point person is at the moment a question, getting the answer, but not having that shared with all of the other hubs. I think it would save everybody a tremendous amount of time if it was chunked out by category.
Yeah.
And in real time and never going away.
Okay.
That would be super, super helpful.
Cool. So because we're over time, Hillary, Michelle, and I will start with repurposing existing meetings and getting that platform up and running. And let's just see how it works. Let's try it for the next like 5 months. See if anyone uses it. And if not, we'll go back to the drawing board. Okay. We'll also get back to people about an additional time to continue having this conversation about how the RSA links to other things and how the early childhood service analysis connects to the rest of the assessment.
Great.
Anything? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to wrap up real
Yeah,
quick
do
since
it.
we're over time. I just want to thank everyone for jumping on. Dylan, Lizzie, Beth, and Aaron Watson also for joining and just being really tight in the timelines that I gave everyone today. So I appreciate all of your attention and participation. And I will be in touch with more information about all of the things that we're talking about. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye, guys.